You wake up to the smell of hay. Not fresh hay. No, this is the kind of hay that's been stepped on by a goat, rolled in by a pig, and occasionally mistaken for a communal latrine by the village children. It scratches your back like a passive-aggressive roommate, reminding you that you live in a wooden box barely dignified enough to be called a cottage. A cottage that leaks when it rains, sways when it storms, and groans louder than a middle-aged monk with sciatica. Welcome to your thrilling new life as a medieval beekeeper. Your mattress, if you can even call it that, is essentially a sack of straw held together by prayers and mildew. It smells like betrayal, wet dog, and something disturbingly close to fermented cabbage. Your pillow is a rock. That's it. Just a rock. A kind, flat one, sure, but still a rock. No memory foam. No contouring support. Just solid granite, because nothing says sweet dreams like head trauma. You sit up slowly. Very slowly. Because your back has aged faster than your soul. Joints pop like overcooked lentils. You stretch, but only because it's slightly less painful than lying still. Your breath condenses in the chilly morning air, because insulation is a modern luxury you absolutely do not have. There's a crack in the wall that lets in a beautiful beam of morning light. It also lets in mice. And wasps. And last week, something that may have been a bat. You named it Bartholomew. Bartholomew has since moved in full-time. So before you shuffle over to the fireless hearth to begin your exciting day of wrangling angry wing stingers, take a second to like the video and subscribe, if this delightful descent into historical mediocrity is your thing. And drop a comment letting me know what time it is where you are and where you're watching from. It's always slightly surreal, in a fun way, to know that while you're dozing off in Nebraska, someone else is wide awake in Tokyo wondering why they're learning about medieval apiary maintenance at 3 a.m. Now, let's ruin your day in the best way possible. You grab your wool tunic. It's scratchy. Like, aggressively so. Like it was made by someone who actively hated the idea of comfort. Which it was. Probably by your mother. Or your neighbor. Or whoever happened to owe you a favor during last year's barley shortage. It's made from local sheep wool, washed in river water, beaten with sticks, and dyed with whatever plants were not poisonous. Probably. You're not entirely sure anymore. Your boots? Huh. You wish. You have a pair of rough leather wrappings tied with cords. They're less footwear and more suggestions. They leak. They squeak. They do not support your arches. But they're better than barefoot, which is how you spent last winter after accidentally setting your last pair on fire. Don't ask. Outside, it's damp. Always damp. Not quite raining, not quite dry, just enough humidity to keep your clothes clammy and your mood permanently sour. The ground is a mixture of mud, manure, and existential dread. The air smells like smoke, sheep, and failure. Somewhere, a rooster crows. It sounds less like a majestic herald of the dawn and more like someone slowly strangling a trumpet. You trudge to your hives. Yes, your pride and joy, 3 woven skeps sitting atop wooden stands near the edge of the forest. They look like upside-down baskets because that's exactly what they are. No fancy wooden frames. No neat little drawers for honey. Just straw coils, mud, spit, and wishful thinking. And bees. Thousands of them. Tiny, winged agents of chaos who make your life both sustainable and absolutely miserable. The bees are already awake, which is more than can be said for you. They hum menacingly, like a vibrating fog of resentment. You respect them, fear them, occasionally talk to them because they understand you better than your neighbors do. They never criticize your posture or your strange interest in moss. They simply sting you, which is, in a way, refreshingly honest. You light a small bundle of dried herbs and moss in your smoker, a medieval invention that consists of a pot with holes and a lot of hope. The smoke calms the bees, allegedly. Or at least it confuses them long enough for you to poke around their home like a burglar in slow motion. You puff the smoke gently. It smells like burnt socks and sage. You inhale too deeply and cough for the next 6 minutes. Now comes the delicate part, lifting the lid. The bees do not like this. They do not enjoy home invasions. But you must check for pests, diseases, and, of course, honey. The sweet, sticky nectar that you rarely get to eat yourself because, surprise, your lord gets a hefty share. You're just the beekeeper. A peasant. A disposable, underappreciated cog in the feudal machine. Still, it's not all bad. Beeswax is valuable. You use it to make candles, waterproof your shoes when you had shoes, and sometimes trade it for things like bread or new wool wrappings. Honey is antiseptic. Sort of. In the sense that it's slightly less deadly than swamp water. You once used it to patch up a pig bite. The pig survived. You nearly didn't. You sit for a moment and watch the bees work. It's oddly peaceful, if you ignore the constant threat of face stings and the fact that you're sitting on damp moss that's slowly soaking into your trousers. You imagine, for a moment, that you are one of them. A bee. Buzzing about. Defending your queen. Pollinating flowers. Making honey. And then dying a horrible death after one act of defiance. So, basically the same as being a serf. A village boy runs past. He's barefoot, shrieking with joy, and covered in something unidentifiable. Possibly jam. Possibly blood. Childhood in the 14th century is a blur of chores, infections, and being yelled at by your grandmother for breathing too loudly. He waves. You wave back. The bees do not wave. They buzz louder, offended by the disturbance. You puff more smoke and mutter an apology in their general direction. It's time to collect honey. Very, very carefully. You pry open the skep with a dull knife that also functions as your kitchen utensil, shoehorn, and dental tool. Inside, the honey glistens. Amber. Sticky. Beautiful. And crawling with bees. You wince as you reach in with your handmade scoop, a stick with a curve, basically, and extract a dripping chunk of comb. You place it in your jar, which is actually just a clay pot with a lid that used to belong to your cousin before he moved to the next village to marry a woman with 4 goats and a larger hut. A bee lands on your eyelid. You freeze. You do not blink. You try not to breathe. The bee, in its infinite wisdom, decides to crawl up your forehead instead of down. It buzzes in your hair, judging your hygiene. Eventually, it leaves. You live another day. Barely. After an hour of gentle thievery, you seal the pot and trudge back to your hut. Your feet are numb. Your hands are sticky. Your face is a canvas of minor stings and regret. You place the honey on the table and sit down to breakfast, cold porridge, yesterday's turnip, and a crust of bread, so hard it could be used as a weapon. You eat in silence, chewing each bite like it's a moral obligation. Outside, the village wakes up. A blacksmith begins hammering. A woman screams at her goat. The church bell rings with all the enthusiasm of a dying cow. You sip water from a wooden cup. It tastes like moss and disappointment. Still, it's water. It's not guaranteed. You're lucky. You think. You scratch your arm absently. Fleas. Always fleas. They are your true companions. They live in your bedding, your clothes, your hair. You once tried to drown them. They laughed. You're pretty sure they have a union. After breakfast, it's time for repairs. One of the skeps has a hole. You patch it with more straw and some wax. You hum a little tune your grandmother used to sing, something about ducks and plague. Very cheerful. You work slowly, methodically. The bees seem calmer now. Almost approving. Or maybe they're plotting. By midday, the sun is high, the flies are numerous, and your back feels like it's been stepped on by a cart horse. You take a break under a tree, ignoring the ants crawling up your leg. You wonder what it would be like to live in a castle, to have clean clothes, a soft bed, a daily bath. Then you remember that castle life also means politics, gout, and being murdered by your cousin during a feast. You decide the bees are safer. Mostly. A wandering friar passes by, singing a hymn and smelling like fermented onions. He blesses you. You nod politely and offer him some honey. He takes it, says something vaguely biblical, and disappears down the road. You sit in silence again, listening to the hum of insects, the wind in the trees, the distant sound of someone being mildly trampled by a cow. Eventually, you get up. There's always more to do. Bees to check, comb to clean, wax to scrape, and later, candles to dip, one by one, in an endless cycle of heat, dip, cool, repeat. Your evenings smell like smoke, tallow, and resignation. And that, dear listener, is your peaceful, miserable, sting-filled day as a medieval beekeeper. But don't worry. This was just morning. And tomorrow will probably be worse. You wake up again. Not from a deep, luxurious slumber. Oh no. That's not on the menu. You wake up because something small and angry just bit your toe. Probably a flea. Possibly a rat. Either way, the bite is the medieval equivalent of an alarm clock, except it doesn't have a snooze button, or a backlight, or basic human decency. You squint in the dim light. It's not even dawn yet. But you're up because your body is in a constant state of low-level suffering and refuses to let you sleep longer than 4 hours at a time. Your knees ache. Your back sounds like a xylophone made of regret. And your sinuses are filled with whatever mildew the cottage has generously shared during the night. You scratch your head. More fleas. Always fleas. It's not personal. It's just biology. You're a host, and they're thriving. You once tried sleeping near the fire to smoke them out. Instead, you woke up coughing, smelling like roast peasant, and found a beetle in your ear. So that experiment's been retired. Outside, it's dark and quiet, the kind of silence that only exists before humanity begins banging things and yelling at livestock. You shuffle to the door, open it, and immediately regret it. A gust of cold, damp air slaps you in the face like a soggy fish. The ground is a muddy soup, the sky is the color of despair, and somewhere in the distance, a donkey is screaming. Loudly, passionately, as if it has seen things. You begin your day, again, with bees. You approach the hives with all the enthusiasm of someone walking into a performance review hosted by wasps. The bees are already active, which is impressive considering the sun isn't even up yet. These bees are unionized in spirit, but not in behavior. They do not believe in weekends, holidays, or personal space. You light your smoker. It sputters. You blow on it. It flares up. You drop it. You now have a small fire. You stomp it out with your foot wraps, which now smell like burning moss and last season's panic. The bees don't care. They hover nearby, judging your incompetence. You try again. This time, it works. Smoke drifts lazily over the skeps. It smells like damp bark, desperation, and the herbs you salvage from your neighbor's overgrown garden while pretending to weed it. He doesn't know. You're not going to tell him. Besides, he owes you for not mentioning the time his pigs got into your cabbage patch and rearranged the entire landscape like drunk landscapers. You pop open the first skep. The bees have been busy. Inside is a maze of comb, thick with honey and movement. The hum is loud, constant, like a vibrating wall of wing threat. You lean in, examining the wax. You're not just looking for honey. No. Today, you're on the hunt for danger. Specifically, bee diseases. Because yes, that's a thing. And no, it's not subtle. The first thing you look for is foul brood. Yes, that's the real name. It sounds like something out of a gothic horror novel, and honestly, it lives up to it. You know you've got foul brood when the hive smells like death dipped in molasses. Rotten, sour, festering sweetness. A smell that says you're not sleeping tonight. Foul brood kills larvae. Turns them into a slimy mess of failure. You poke the comb gently. No slime. Good. You sniff. Still smells like bees and panic, not doom. Excellent. You also check for chalk brood. Less dramatic, more fungal. Larvae turn into little chalky mummies. Like ancient Egyptian corpses, but much smaller and more disappointing. You found a few before. When you showed your neighbor, he screamed and said it was witchcraft. You didn't correct him. You need the reputation. No signs today. The hive is healthy. For now. You sit on a mossy log and write a few notes on a scrap of parchment with a piece of charcoal. Your writing is terrible, but legible enough for your own future self, who will likely be equally tired and covered in mud. You note the temperature, the wind, and how many bees tried to sting you today. 3. That's a good day. Mid-morning arrives, and with it, the sound of commerce. Or what passes for commerce in your village, a cart full of questionable turnips, a man yelling about leather scraps, and a woman trying to trade her goat for something that isn't also a goat. You pack up a small pouch of beeswax and a sealed jar of honey, your tribute to the local manor. Yes, tribute. Because you're not just a beekeeper. You're also a taxpayer. Except instead of paying in currency, you pay in products. Honey, wax, and the occasional chicken if things get desperate. The manor collects it all, and in return, they don't burn down your cottage or accuse you of sorcery. Most years, anyway. You walk to the manor. It's a half-hour slog through the mud, fields, and other people's chickens. Beeswax is valuable. It's the medieval version of duct tape. It seals things, polishes things, lights things, waterproof things, and, if you believe the local healer, cures things. He once rubbed it on a broken finger. The finger never healed, but it did smell fantastic for a week. You arrive at the manor. It's large, gray, and thoroughly unimpressed by your existence. The steward meets you at the door. He wears a hat that's too big and a scowl that's too permanent. You hand over the goods. He nods. You say nothing. He says nothing. It's the medieval equivalent of a customer service interaction. On your way back, you pass by the market. There's a man selling eel pies. No one is buying. There's another selling fresh milk from a goat that is currently asleep and definitely not lactating. There are apples, wrinkled, possibly edible. You consider trading some wax for a slice of cheese. Then you remember that last time you did that, you ended up with something that was more rind than substance and gave you stomach cramps for a week. You decide against it. Back home, you check your remaining wax stores. The wax must be cleaned. That means melting it down, skimming off the bee bits, dead ants, and occasional twigs. You build a small fire, place your melting pot carefully, and stir with a stick. The wax melts slowly, releasing a smell that is oddly pleasant. Earthy. Warm. Like summer in solid form. You skim the top and pour the clean wax into molds, little wooden cups you carved yourself with a blunt knife and unreasonable patience. Later, you'll make candles. Dip by dip. Over and over. Each one takes time. Hours. They're uneven. Slightly lumpy. But they work. Sort of. They burn for a few hours and then collapse dramatically, like a monk after wine. You use them for light and for trade. People want candles. They want light. They're tired of tripping over cats in the dark. And here's the great irony of your life. You make light, but you never rest. Because there's always more to do. As the day winds down, you head back to the hives. You check them again, carefully, because a healthy hive today doesn't mean it will be tomorrow. Bees are fragile. They die for no reason. They swarm. They vanish. You once lost a whole hive to a bear. A literal bear. It walked in, ate the honey, knocked over the skep, and left you a gift of bear droppings that is still haunting your dreams. You build a fence. It's pathetic. Just a few sticks and rope. But maybe it will slow the next bear down long enough for you to scream and run in the opposite direction. The sun sets. You sit near the hives, watching the bees settle in. The hum softens. The air grows cool. You feel the aches in your hands, your shoulders, your soul. The moon rises. Another night begins. You light a candle. It flickers weakly, casting long shadows across your muddy floor and cracked walls. You eat your dinner in silence. A boiled root vegetable. Possibly a turnip. Possibly something more suspicious. You chew slowly, staring at the flickering flame. The bees are asleep. You are not. Your brain is buzzing now, just like the hive, full of thoughts you didn't ask for. Did you harvest enough wax? Is that mold near the roof? Are you slowly turning into your uncle? He talked to chickens. You talk to bees. It's a thin line. You crawl into bed. Or rather, you collapse into straw. It pokes you in all the wrong places. You adjust. You give up. You close your eyes. A flea bites your neck. You sigh. And for a moment, just a moment, you almost drift off. Outside, a fox screams. Inside, you mutter a quiet curse and pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. And thus ends another perfectly miserable, endlessly repetitive, quietly beautiful day in the life of a medieval beekeeper. And yes, tomorrow will probably be worse. You wake up to the sound of buzzing. Not metaphorical buzzing. Literal. Loud. Close. Alarmingly enthusiastic. It's not in your head. It's not a dream. It's real. It's angry. And it's happening before sunrise, which is offensive on a spiritual level. You sit up. Your hair is stuck to your face with sweat and something vaguely sticky. Your mouth tastes like the inside of a wooden bowl left out in the rain. Outside, the humming grows louder. You know that sound. You've heard it before. That's not the gentle hum of happy bees. That's the sound of a swarm. Congratulations. You've won the Medieval Beekeeper lottery. Except instead of gold, the prize is a cloud of stinging insects and a full day of absolute chaos. So before you panic or just roll over and accept your fate, Take a second. Really, just a second. If you've made it this far into the video and you're still awake or just drifting off peacefully while I describe bee-induced misery, maybe tap the like button. Subscribe if this kind of soothing suffering is your vibe. And, most importantly, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love knowing who else is lying awake at 3:07 a.m. thinking about bees, mold, and root vegetables. Okay, back to the swarm. You stumble outside. The air is thick, not just with mist, but with noise. Bees everywhere. A writhing, wing cloud, floating just above the ground like a medieval death balloon. They're not attacking, yet. They're just moving, searching, thinking, plotting. You spot them settling on a branch near your fence. Of course, not a convenient branch. Not a reachable branch. A high, awkward, splintery branch that looks like it hasn't been touched by human hands since the reign of King Who Gives a Damn. You sigh, deeply. You're going to have to climb. Now, catching a bee swarm is a delicate art. Technically. In reality, it's 20% technique, 80% dumb luck, and 100% risk of falling out of a tree covered in bees. You grab your swarm basket, a special woven container you made yourself, shaped like a skep but portable. It smells like wax, sweat, and unfulfilled dreams. You approach the tree. You stare up at the branch. It's higher than you thought. Of course it is. Your back already hurts just looking at it. But you're a medieval beekeeper, and this is your job. Your noble duty. And also, if you don't catch this swarm, you lose a third of your bees and a decent chunk of your income. And possibly your social standing. Because, let's be real, nobody respects a beekeeper who loses swarms to the neighbor's orchard. That man still says you cursed his cow. You can't afford another scandal. You begin the climb. The tree is damp. The bark peels off in chunks. Your hands are scratched before you even reach the first branch. You pause to swat a mosquito, miss, and nearly fall. Excellent start. 10 minutes later, you're halfway up, knees shaking, sweat dripping into your eyes. The bees are watching. You swear one of them is smirking. Finally, you reach them. The swarm is clumped around the queen, a living, buzzing basketball of devotion and low-level rage. You raise the basket. Slowly, carefully. You place it just under the swarm and then, because this is the traditional method, you give the branch a firm, violent shake. Boom. The bees fall. Not all of them, but most. They hit the basket like wet hail. You scramble to put the lid on, climb down, and run very, very calmly away from the area. Success. Mostly. You got the queen. Probably. Hopefully. If not, well, they'll be gone by evening, and you'll cry into your cabbage stew again. But for now, they seem content. The basket hums. You place it near your hives, shaded, covered with a damp cloth. You whisper a prayer. Not to any particular deity. Just a general plea to the universe to let you keep your bees. You sit. You breathe. You realize your knee is bleeding. Again. Just another morning. Once the swarm is settled, you return to your daily hive inspection. It's become ritual now. You with your smoker, your veil, your hunched posture, and haunted eyes. You check for pests. You check for mold. You check for signs that the bees have decided, once again, to rebel against you in the most passive-aggressive way possible, by replacing their queen. Ah yes, queen replacement. The drama. See, Wimbies don't like their queen anymore. Maybe she's old, maybe she's not laying eggs fast enough, maybe they just collectively decided it's time for a coup. They raise a new one. Secretly. Quietly. In the nursery cells. You'll know it's happening when you see a supersedure cell, a large, peanut-shaped pod that looks like it's plotting something. Inside is a new queen. A future monarch. A threat. Now, if both queens hatch, they fight. Literally. To the death. It's like the finale of a very tiny, buzzing version of Game of Thrones. You don't intervene. You just watch. Or you walk away and pretend it's not happening. Because meddling in royal politics never ends well, even in a beehive. Today, though all looks well, the queen is laying. The workers are working. The drones are existing. Useless, lazy, and destined for death once mating season ends. You respect that energy, honestly. Around midday, you prepare for the honey harvest. This is the glamorous part of your job. The part people imagine when they think of beekeeping. Warm sunlight, golden honeycomb, smiling bees offering you nature's bounty. That's not how it works. First, you suit up, layers of linen, leather, and hope. You light your smoker, again, and puff it around the hive. The bees retreat into the comb, confused and mildly offended. You open the skep. The comb inside is thick with honey, capped in wax, and glistening like treasure. It also weighs approximately 1,000,000 pounds and is full of creatures that want you dead. You slice away the honeycomb with a dull knife. It squishes. It oozes. It drips onto your sleeve, your shoes, your soul. You place it into a large clay bowl and cover it quickly. If you don't, the bees will try to reclaim it, and you'll end up in a slapstick battle involving sticks, towels, and possibly fire. You retreat inside. Extraction is simple. You crush the comb. You press it. You let the honey drip through a cloth into a jar. It takes hours. Your hands are sticky. Your hair is sticky. Your floor is sticky. Everything smells like sugar and frustration. But when it's done, when the last drop drips into the jar and you seal it tight, you feel something like pride. Or relief. Or maybe just exhaustion. You clean up. You eat a piece of bread with fresh honey. It's good. Really good. Possibly the only moment of unqualified joy you'll have today. And then, naturally, a bee stings you on the ankle. Because balance must be maintained. The day ends slowly. You patch a hole in your roof with beeswax and hope. You check the fences. You yell at a chicken that looks like it's planning something. You light a candle. You sit on your stool and stare into the distance. The bees are quiet now. The hives hum softly in the dusk. You think about the swarm, the queen, the honey, the wounds. You think about next season. About winter. About whether your wax will hold up, whether your jars will keep, whether you'll make it through another year of stings, mud, and existential uncertainty. And still, despite everything, you wouldn't trade this life. Not for a tavern. Not for a plow. Not even for a monastery with warm porridge and absolutely no bees. Because at least your bees don't judge you when you talk to yourself. You wake up cold. Not, oh, it's a bit chilly cold, not sweater weather, not even maybe I'll start the fire cold. We're talking the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and starts whispering passive-aggressive insults to your joints. Your breath fogs the air. Your blanket has betrayed you. Your toes have lost all sensation and probably a little dignity. It's winter. Medieval winter. Which is less hot cocoa and cozy vibes and more gritty frostbite survival simulator, now featuring livestock. Outside, the world is gray. The trees are bare. The wind is yelling again. You haven't seen the sun in 3 weeks. You vaguely remember what it felt like to be warm, but that memory is fading fast, like your sense of optimism. And in the distance, near the hedge, the hives. Oh yes, you almost forgot. You're not just cold and miserable, you're responsible for the survival of thousands of freezing bees. Tiny, furious, freezing bees. Welcome to the joyless sport of medieval winter beekeeping. But before we go any further, and trust me, we will, if you're still here, still barely awake and somehow not dreaming of better, bee-free jobs, give this video a like. Subscribe if you enjoy drifting off to tales of historically accurate hardship. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? I love knowing who else is listening to this while tucked under 19 blankets, contemplating life choices. Now, back to our regularly scheduled seasonal suffering. You shuffle outside in layers of wool, linen, and melancholy. The wind immediately finds the gap between your sleeve and your glove and stabs your wrist like it owes it money. The sky is the color of old dishwater. The ground is frozen solid, which is convenient because now you can't slip on mud, just ice. You reach the hives. Your bees are in cluster mode now. That's their version of a winter survival strategy, bunched together in a dense ball, shiver constantly to keep warm, and slowly eat through their stored honey while waiting for the sun to reappear and your incompetence to stop threatening their lives. You can't open the hives. That would be a death sentence. Any disturbance, any sudden cold or entering the hive, could chill the cluster and kill your queen. So you check the outside. You press your ear to the side of the skep. Nothing. Then, faintly, the softest hum. Like a sigh. They're alive. For now. Still, Winter means vigilance. You must check for signs of moisture, the number one enemy of winter bees. Not cold. Cold they can handle. But dampness? Condensation? That's bee death. Wet bees are dead bees. Bees don't hibernate. They slowly starve while vibrating themselves to death in a humidity dome of sadness. To prevent this, you pack straw around the hives. You tilted them slightly to prevent water from pooling. You used wax to seal any obvious cracks. You said a few prayers. You left offerings. You're not above superstition anymore. Once a week, no more, you do a winter lift. That's where you gently, ever so gently, lift the back of the skep to gauge its weight. Heavy means honey. Light means doom. You try not to panic. This one is light. You don't cry. You've cried before. The tears just freeze to your face. You shuffle back to your hovel and fetch your emergency honey stores. Not for you, of course. You're on route stew again. But you did save a little pressed honeycomb from the fall harvest. You warm it slightly by the hearth, then wrap in cloth and carry it back to the hive like some kind of medieval bee butler delivering room service. You slide the honey in through a small access hole you drilled for this exact scenario. You pray they accept it. They're not always kind to foreign comb. Back inside, you sit near the fire. You used to keep your bees in woven skeps indoors during the coldest part of winter. That was before the smoke incident, and the wax fire, and the day a stray bee stung your cousin in the face during Lent and he accused you of devilry. So now they stay outside. And you cope. You spend winter repairing broken skeps. It's an endless, soul-crushing task. Each coil must be rewound with straw and stitched tightly with bramble or hemp. Your fingers bleed. Your back aches. You spill beeswax on your lap. Again. You also make candles. It's both a side hustle and a survival necessity. You melt your old comb in a pot over the fire, which, by the way, smells like burnt honey and regret. Then pour the wax into small clay molds or dip wicks made from rags or flax string. These candles are valuable. They burn clean. They don't reek of animal fat. Monks love them. You trade them for essentials, salt, oil, the occasional bit of dried fruit. Luxury. But wax is precious. You only make a few. You use them sparingly. Light is expensive. Darkness is free. Sometimes, in the dead of winter, you think about giving up. Selling your bees. Moving to a town. Learning a trade that doesn't involve stings, weather anxiety, and swarms. Maybe tanning. Or coopering. Or joining a monastery and pretending you were called by God instead of driven there by winged despair. But then, one bitter morning in late February, you see it. A bee. Just one. Staggering out of the hive. Wobbling in the cold. Its tiny legs brushing against the frozen earth as it stumbles toward the weak sun like a drunk uncle at a wedding feast. You watch it. In awe. In horror. And then, it poops. You see, bees don't defecate in the hive. That would be disgusting. They hold it all winter until it's safe to fly out and release the full weight of their digestive agony into the crisp morning air. This is called a cleansing flight. It is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Dozens of bees soon join in. Streaks of yellow splatter across the snow. It smells like fermented pollen and despair. You cheer, quietly. Because this gross little display means your bee survived. They made it. And so did you. Sort of. You go back inside, light one of your rare candles, and mark the day. You'll still get snow. Still get storms. But the bees are flying. The queen lives. The worst may be over. At least until next winter. Or until you try to extract honey again with a crack press and a jug that leaks. Or until you get stung in the throat while eating bread. But for now, things are okay. You lie down. You close your eyes. You try not to dream about bees. But you do. Every single night. Because you're a medieval beekeeper. And this is your quiet, sticky, absurd little life. You wake up to the sound of church bells. Again. They're not for you. They're never for you. Not really. This time, they're for old Matilda, the midwife who lived down near the brook, the one with the one good eye and a suspicious number of cats. She's died. Finally. Peacefully? Probably. You hope. You never asked. But you do one thing immediately. Before breakfast. Before chores. Before your daily routine of cold hands and existential dread. You walk outside, stand by your hives, and you tell your bees, yes, that's a real thing. In fact, not doing it might bring disaster, crop failure, queen death, bees swarming to the heavens in protest. Because in the weird, buzzing cosmos of medieval superstition, bees must be told of deaths, of births, of marriages, bad harvests, feasts, excommunications, and major arguments about sheep. If you don't, your hives may mourn in their own way, by dying, or leaving, or producing honey that tastes like shame and spiritual rot. So you stand by the skep, and you say, quite solemnly, bees, dear friends, old Matilda has died. May your wings carry the news gently. You nod. The bees buzz faintly. That's enough. Now, if you think this is strange, congratulations. You're not alone. But here's the thing. In your world, nothing is just physical. Everything is spiritual, symbolic, sacred, and potentially haunted. And bees? Bees are not mere bugs. Bees are divine. But before we dive into the honeycomb-shaped rabbit hole of medieval bee theology, this is your friendly narrator, once again, reminding you to tap that like button if you enjoyed drifting into sleep with tales of agricultural mysticism and vaguely sarcastic historical commentary. Subscribe if this is your kind of bedtime ritual. And as always, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and what time you finally gave up on counting sheep and turned to medieval beekeeping despair. I see you, 4:12 a.m. in Saskatchewan. Right. Back to the hives. In your time, bees are seen as messengers between worlds, creatures of immense symbolism. In some villages, people believe bees carry souls, literal souls, especially the souls of children. Others believe bees are connected directly to the Virgin Mary, and that their constant, tireless work is a holy rhythm, a miniature echo of divine order. And because of this, bees are kept close. Not just physically, your hives are practically part of the house, but spiritually. You cover them in black cloth during funerals. You sing to them during feast days. You whisper secrets to them when nobody is looking. And when someone dies, you don't just tell the bees, you inform them. With dignity, with formality, sometimes with gifts. In some places, you tap on the hive 3 times, softly, like a knock on a coffin. Then you speak the name of the dead, as though the bees might know them, might remember their scent, might carry their essence on the wind. And you're not the only one who believes this. There's Brother Thomas, the monk with a voice like a goat, who swears that bees attend Massachusetts. Not physically, of course, although once, during Lent, one did fly in and land directly on the chalice, which caused a theological debate that lasted 3 days. But spiritually, their buzzing is a kind of hymn, their hive a cloister, their queen a holy matron of sweetness and order. Of course, not everyone is so poetic. Your neighbor, let's call him Gerald, because every village has a Gerald, believes bees are witches in disguise. Little demons sent to spy on human affairs. He once tried to drown a swarm in ale and got stung in the tongue. He now mumbles slightly and insists you hexed him. You did not. Probably. But the truth is, nobody really understands bees. Even you, their keeper, their servant, their humble wax-smeared companion, spend most of your days guessing. You know they make honey. You know they sting. You know they die mysteriously sometimes, or swarm at the worst possible moment, or spend hours hanging motionless from a tree like a winged ornament of doom. And so, your world fills in the gaps with stories, rituals, lore. For example, on certain feast days, you place a sprig of rosemary near the hives. Not for pests, for memory. You recite blessings in Latin you barely understand. Not for show, for survival. You once saw a monk pour a spoonful of honey onto a stone and claim it was a charm for fertility. You're pretty sure he was lying. His wife looked unimpressed. There are other customs, too. When you harvest honey, you leave a portion behind for the bees. Always. No matter how hungry the winter looks. Because to take everything would be greedy, insulting, and possibly punishable by sudden swarm rebellion. You once heard of a man who took too much, scooped out every last golden drop and left his bees with nothing but brittle wax and broken dreams. They left. Every single one. The next morning, his hives were silent. The morning after that, his dog ran off. His wife left him a week later. Coincidence? Maybe. But you're not taking that chance. You're still single. You don't need more abandonment. Another tale, whispered by traveling peddlers and half-drunk friars, says that if you see a bee in your house during a funeral, it's the soul of the departed visiting one last time. If the bee lands on you, it's a blessing. If it stings you, you probably owed them money. And then there's the dream theory. Sometimes, you dream of bees. Swarms. Honeycomb stretching into infinity. A queen the size of a dog whispering secrets in Latin. You wake up sweating, vaguely hungry, and unsure whether you've received a vision or just need to drink less mead before bed. You tell no one, except maybe the bees. You talk to them often now. Not always with words. Sometimes with presence. You sit near the hives and hum. You think they recognize your voice. You feed them drops of syrup during lean years, and in return, they don't sting you quite as much as they do your cousin. You consider that a pact. Still, things go wrong. Always. One year, a hive just dies. No reason. No mold, no mites, no warning. 1 week they're buzzing, the next, silence. You bury the skep. Like a body. You cry. Quietly. Your cousin laughs at you, but he has never loved anything in his life. Another time, a visiting merchant tells you he heard of bees that danced in patterns to communicate. You scoff. Absurd. What next? Bees reciting psalms? But then, weeks later, you see it, one bee waggling its abdomen in tight, rhythmic circles. Another watching, then following. You feel something shift in your brain. You say nothing. You are now 40% convinced bees are smarter than humans, possibly better organized. You start suspecting they have their own religion. You try not to think too hard about what they might be praying to. Still, life goes on. You tend the hives. You tell them when someone dies. You whisper to them before long journeys. You leave them gifts, a flower, a ribbon, a crumb of bread. You once read about a queen in France who offered her bees a gold thimble. You try not to be jealous. Your bees got a moldy turnip and a haiku you made up on the spot. But maybe they appreciate it. Because they're still here. Still humming. Still making honey. Still inexplicably alive in a world that's colder, harder, and stranger than anyone wants to admit. And you? You're not just a beekeeper anymore. You're a priest of the buzzing chapel. A steward of the winged order. A sleepless, slightly stung disciple of the strange, sacred rhythm that binds insect to flower, flower to sun, sun to life. Even if your boots leak. Even if your bees occasionally poop on your shirt. Even if you're not entirely sure any of this matters. Because in the quiet, in the candlelight, in the long hours between midnight and dawn, you swear you can hear them whispering. And you whisper back. You wake up and your knee is making that noise again. It's not a loud noise. More of a whisper. A whisper of betrayal. It clicks when you move, twinges when you stand, and throbs when you sit. It's a kind of joint pain that medieval physicians would have looked at and immediately declared, "Aha! You've angered your humors. Best apply leeches and consider your sins." But you, dear beekeeper, are a bit more advanced than that. Or at least, you think you are. Because you've got honey. Not just any honey. Your honey. Honey you extracted, strained, and stored in wax-sealed crocks hidden beneath the least damp corner of your hut. Thick, golden, slightly gritty from pollen, and vaguely scented like wild thyme and effort. And now it's medicine. You reach into your jar with a small wooden spatula, not a spoon, never a spoon, that's heresy, and scoop out a dollop of what some monks have called nectar of the angels and what your cousin once called bee spit jam. You ignore him. You smear it generously across your aching knee. It's sticky. It smells faintly of summer. It's also incredibly impractical if you're trying to wear pants. But it feels warm, comforting, ancient. This, my dear listener, is the golden age of medieval medical nonsense. Because while most people in your village are still curing ailments by waving herbs of the moon or bleeding themselves into unconsciousness, you, beekeeper, eccentric, low-key insect priest, are part of a weirdly effective medical tradition that has existed for thousands of years. Bee-based medicine. But before we start bathing in honey and making questionable poultices, now's your regular reminder to like the video if you haven't already. If you enjoy falling asleep to me mumbling about 12th century joint pain and insect-based healthcare, go ahead and subscribe. and drop a comment letting me know what's hurting you tonight and what time it is wherever you are. I'm sure your modern problems are better than medieval knee clickery, but I'm still curious. Right? Let's get into the sticky business of historical healing. First of all, honey. Let's talk about it. Honey isn't just sugar. It's magic. Or, at least, it might as well be. In a world where antiseptics don't exist, where surgery is close your eyes and bite down on this stick, and where open wounds are basically invitations to die of Latin-named horrors, honey is a godsend. It draws moisture out of wounds, which helps prevent bacterial growth. It creates a seal, keeping dirt and flies out. It's slightly acidic, mildly antibacterial, and, most importantly, it doesn't rot. You could bury it for 200 years and still spread it on toast. If you had toast, which you don't, you've got barley mush and anxiety. Still, that doesn't stop people from using honey for everything. Cough? Honey. Wound? Honey. Ulcer? Mix honey with wine, say a prayer, and hope for the best. Toothache? Honey and ashes applied directly to the jaw. Upset stomach? Honey and vinegar. Or honey and fennel. Or honey and regret. And if you were wealthy enough to consult a monk physician, they'd likely give you an actual recipe, written in Latin, of course, because God forbid poor people understand instructions. Something like, mix equal parts of bee's honey, ox bile, and powdered myrrh. Apply to inflamed area thrice daily while facing east. Because apparently healing only works if you're aligned like a sundial. There's also mead. Oh, sweet, medicinal mead. Technically, it's alcohol. But medically, it's an elixir. You've heard priests recommend it for melancholy. You've seen peasants drink it for courage before dental procedures, aka being punched in the mouth with a hot knife. Some even use mead mixed with crushed herbs as a sleeping draught. Others, just to make life feel slightly less like a burlap sack full of chores. But the true miracle worker? Bee venom. Yes, venom. The part that stings. Welcome to the wonderfully ill-advised world of apitherapy. The belief that stinging yourself on purpose with angry insects is somehow good for you. Now, let's be clear, you didn't come up with this. You heard it from a traveling wise woman who once cured your neighbor's gout by smacking his foot with a birch switch, then applying 3 bees to his toe in quick succession. He screamed. A lot. Then the swelling went down, possibly due to the inflammation or maybe because he just stopped complaining. But ever since, bee venom has become part of your household repertoire. You've got a special jar for your volunteer bees. It's a repurposed clay mug with holes poked in the lid and a strip of cloth soaked in apple vinegar, their last meal, you like to think. You place the jar against your skin, lift the lid, and let the bee do its work. Sting, burning, swelling, cursing. Then, relief? Maybe. Probably not. But you pretend it works. Some people even believe that bee stings can cure arthritis, numb the nerves, or, more terrifyingly, banish demons. There's a story about a woman in your region who got stung 32 times during a honey harvest and came out of it speaking perfect Latin. She'd never studied. Naturally, the bishop had her locked up. Then there's propolis, bee glue. The stuff bees use to patch their hives, seal gaps, and mummify small intruders like ants or unfortunate rodents. You scrape it off the inside of your skep like a criminal removing evidence. It smells like sap and doom. It's chewy, bitter. But monks swear by it. Applied to cuts, it supposedly speeds up healing. Taken orally, it allegedly cures ulcers and sore throats. You once saw a peddler rub it on a horse's hoof and claim it healed a limp. You tried it on your own foot. Nothing happened. But now your foot smells slightly better. In desperate times, you mix honey with crushed beetles and spread it on boils. You combine beeswax with rendered fat to make an ointment for cracked skin. You've even, just once, tried snorting powdered honey and rosemary because a tanner's apprentice said it cured headaches. It did not. It did, however, make your sinuses smell like Christmas. There are other things, too. You brew a honey tisane for colds. You mix honey and garlic for chest infections. You drink a spoonful of honey dissolved in warm beer to treat anxiety, which absolutely does not work, but it does help you fall asleep thinking about bees instead of your unpaid tithe. And of course, there are rituals. Because medicine isn't just about herbs and honey, it's about intention. You recite prayers. You burn wax in a little dish. You hum to your bees before you harvest, believing their honey will carry your vibration. You once inscribed a prayer to Saint Ambrose, the patron saint of beekeepers, on a scrap of leather and wore it around your neck during a toothache. You still have the scar. You also still have the toothache. But hey, faith is free. So is placebo. You've noticed, too, that your bees seem calmer when you're sick. You once approached the hives with a fever and they barely buzzed. You joked they were tending to you. Then you started to believe it. Now, when your joints ache or your back seizes from skeps too heavy for your will to live, you sit near the hives. Just sit. Let the sound of their humming fill your ears. You close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's not. But in a world without hospitals, clinics, or even reliable soap, you take your medicine where you can find it, in jars, in wax, in sting, in syrup, in silence. And so, you press your honey-soaked bandage to your knee, wince, and hobble outside. You've got work to do. Bees to tend. Superstitions to perform. Maybe a poultice to invent. Maybe a whole new branch of rustic pharmacology to pioneer using nettles and sarcasm. After all, you're not just a beekeeper anymore. You're a healer. Sort of. A sticky, slightly swollen, sleep-deprived healer with bees in your socks and a jar of miracle goo under your bed. And honestly, it's not the worst career. At least the bees don't argue. You are in court. No, you didn't murder anyone. Not technically. Not even metaphorically, unless you count that time you let your cousin drink from the mead barrel before the solstice. He didn't die, per se, but he did claim to see angels made entirely out of moss. No, you're in court for something far more serious and far more medieval. Your bees committed a crime. Specifically, they swarmed. And in swarming, that totally natural, totally normal process in which a healthy bee colony splits into two, with the old queen flapping off dramatically like a tiny, winged diva, they trespassed. They flew over a fence. They landed on someone else's apple tree. And now they are squatters. So now, you, humble beekeeper, peaceful lover of pollen and headaches, are standing before the local reeve, accused of grand theft apiary. You try to explain. The bees have minds of their own. They don't respond to orders. There is no leash, no tiny lead rope or medieval GPS. But your neighbor, old Oswin, insists you trained them to fly onto his property, and that you now owe him either 12 pence or half a pig. You begin to protest, mostly because you don't have a pig, and if you did, you wouldn't split it down the middle like a lunatic. But the reeve silences you with a look and begins quoting from the laws of Alfred. Yes, these are real. Yes, they go back to the 9th century. Because, and here's the absurd part, bees had rights. Medieval Europe, for all its manure and malnutrition, took bee law very seriously. Swarms were considered property, and property, as always, means trouble. Let's begin with the basics. If your bee swarmed and landed in someone else's tree, the tree owner could not just take them. They were still yours, technically, but only if you followed them immediately. You had to chase them, like some kind of deranged, wing-chasing lunatic through bramble and bog. If you lost sight of them, too bad. They were now wild, free agents, unclaimed goods. There are even records in Anglo-Saxon law detailing how long you had to reclaim a swarm, 3 days in some cases. Other regions had more complicated rules. For instance, if your swarm nested in another man's structure, say a barn or even the walls of a chapel, you had to pay rent for the bee's residency. Yes, bee rent. Because feudalism wasn't just for humans. So, before we dive further into this beautifully ridiculous rabbit hole of bee jurisprudence, it's your legally mandated moment to like the video if you haven't already. If you enjoy slowly falling asleep to tales of insect litigation and honey-coated conflict, subscribe. And do let me know in the comments what time it is for you, and whether your bees have ever been legally accused of trespassing. If not, congratulations. You're doing better than me. Back to court. You're still standing there, hat in hand, listening to Oswin describe, with increasing embellishment, how your bees attacked his livestock and stared down his wife. You suspect he's making most of this up, especially the bit about one bee wearing tiny trousers. But it doesn't matter. What matters is ownership. Because bee law, like all good law, is rooted in confusion. Let's go deeper. Under Frankish law, That's early medieval France. A swarm was yours only as long as you maintained visual contact, which meant, effectively, that the moment the bees went over a hedge and you blinked, they ceased to be yours. Good luck proving that in court when you've got hay in your boots and bee stings on your face. In Irish Brehon law, things were even more poetic. The ancient Irish classified bees as fish. Yes, fish, because they swim through the air, which meant they fell under the same property rules as salmon. If a bee stung a person, the beekeeper might owe them honey as compensation. If a swarm entered another person's house, the householder had the right to claim part of the next harvest. And if someone stole honey, that was a serious crime, possibly even a curse-worthy one. Oh, and get this, in some regions, if a man found a hive in the forest and it appeared to be wild, no marks of ownership, no signs of human tending, he could claim it by placing a wooden cross nearby. Instant bee acquisition. It was basically like medieval geocaching, but with a side of pious theft. But not all bee crimes were about swarms. Some were about sabotage. There are recorded cases, especially in monastic settings, where rival keepers would poison another's hive by placing bitter herbs at the entrance. Or, more maliciously, introduce a second queen into the hive to incite chaos. Because if you thought Game of Thrones was dramatic, try watching a queen bee fight to the death in front of 30,000 shearing insects. Sometimes, entire monasteries would accuse one another of bee theft. Yes, monks, literal men of God, sneaking into apiaries at night, clad in robes, to abscond with hives like honey-loving raccoons. Some even claimed divine visions to justify their crimes. The Lord told me to liberate these bees, one friar allegedly said. He was excommunicated. In some towns, you could brand your hives, carve a symbol into the side, a rudimentary logo, if you will. That way, if someone stole your hive or if it was destroyed in a fire, you could prove ownership. There's even a story from 13th century England in which two farmers got into a brawl over a hive, only to be dragged before a magistrate who demanded they draw the bee's home mark from memory. Neither could. The bees were then awarded to the parish priest, which feels suspicious, but also on brand. Now let's talk about bee murder. Yes, that's a thing. If your neighbor deliberately destroyed your hives, say, by setting fire to them, flooding them with smoke, or, heaven forbid, striking them with a stick in a moment of rage, he could be fined. In some cases, heavily. Not just for the cost of the honey, but for the loss of future production. One 12th century charter from Flanders even outlines punishments for bee poisoners, men who spread sulfur or ash at the base of hives to kill colonies out of spite. The penalty? Public flogging, repayment of honey, and, delightfully specific, a forced apology delivered to the remaining bees. Yes, you had to apologize to the bees. You were expected to approach the hives, kneel, and recite a formal statement of regret, while the bees buzzed in judgment. If they stung you during the apology, it was believed to mean your sincerity was lacking. If they remained calm, forgiveness was granted. Honestly, it makes more sense than most HR departments. Bees were also considered witnesses. In several parts of Europe, especially in rural France and Germany, it was common practice to inform the bees of major life events. Births, marriages, deaths. Failure to do so? A serious spiritual offense. If someone in the household died and you forgot to tell the bees, it was believed they would stop producing honey. Or worse, fly away, never to return. This wasn't just folklore. It was law-adjacent. A 15th century will from Normandy explicitly stated that upon the testator's death, the bees must be informed in proper manner and tone, lest the family's livelihood vanish on wings of insulted indignation. And so, just as people covered mirrors and tolled bells, they also whispered to their hives. "My husband has passed," they'd murmur. "He thanks you for your work. Please stay with us." You, of course, do this too. Even if you don't believe in it. Even if your bees don't understand. Because the risk is too high. And because, frankly, you've seen weirder things. So now, back to court. You argue that your bees swarmed due to weather. That they flew over Oswin's fence of their own accord. That you chased them, but your tunic got caught on a bramble, and by the time you freed yourself, the swarm had entered the forbidden orchard. Oswin scoffs. The reef sighs. A decision is made, you will retrieve your bees. But you must leave behind a token, a small jar of honey, sealed with wax, as payment for trespass. You nod. It could be worse. Oswin could have demanded your hive knife or your second best hood. Instead, it's just honey. Replaceable. Sort of. You leave the court. Bees buzzing in your wake. You survived another chapter of medieval bureaucracy and lived to sting another day. You wake up to a Gregorian chant. Not the soothing kind, though. This one is off-key, nasal, and drifting from a stone chapel downwind, meaning it's carried not by holy inspiration, but by physics and unfortunate proximity. The voice belongs to Brother Wulfstan, whose idea of harmony is somewhere between dying goose and mun being mildly burned. You roll over on your straw mattress. It crackles. The air smells like damp linen and beeswax. You've overslept. Again. You pull on your hose, the medieval equivalent of yoga pants, except much more judgmental, and stumble outside to check your hives. They sit behind your modest cottage, lined up like chubby wooden coffins filled with ambition and occasional stinging. The bees are already out, gliding in elegant loops like golden question marks. Unlike you, they're always early. Unlike Brother Wulfstan, they don't sing. You give them a nod of respect. Because in this chapter, we're finally going to talk about bees and God. Yes, bees, those buzzing, pollen-dusted little anarchists, were considered holy. Not just useful, not just delicious, but downright spiritual. In fact, to a medieval monk, your average bee was more morally upright than most humans. Less gluttonous, more industrious, never gossiped, didn't drink. And they did all their work in a perfectly organized society without anyone needing to invent feudalism. Basically, the Benedictines took one look at a beehive and said, we should be more like that. But before we dive headfirst into monk bee theology and honey-flavored virtue, take a second, just one small second, to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're still awake, congratulations. If you're drifting, even better. And drop a comment below, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? It's oddly soothing to imagine you curled up in bed, while medieval monks compare themselves to insects. So, let's begin with the basics. Bees were theologically loaded. To the medieval mind, bees represented purity, virginity, obedience, and harmony within a hierarchy. In other words, the ideal monastery. They were seen as the perfect blend of discipline and purpose. Even the way bees reproduced, or rather, didn't seem to reproduce, fascinated religious scholars. They thought bees didn't mate. No one had seen it. So they concluded bees must be virginal. Some even claimed they were created directly from flowers, or from the tears of angels, or, my personal favorite, from the carcasses of oxen. Yes, oxen. This lovely little myth comes from Virgil, by way of Egyptian legend. According to it, if you took a dead ox, sealed it up, and left it for a few days, bees would emerge from its body like winged miracles. It's unclear whether anyone tried this or just claimed they had, but the image stuck, bees as holy, spontaneous manifestations of divine order and rotting beef. Of course, the church got involved. Because if there's anything the church loved more than obscure relics and incense, it was turning animals into metaphors. And the bee was ripe for allegory. The queen bee? Symbol of Christ. The workers? Devoted monks. The drone? A lazy sinner, tolerated for a while, then cast out. The hive itself? The church. Built on unity, order, and the sweet promise of salvation, and, occasionally, fermented honey. One of the earliest theological texts to mention bees in this way was the Physiologus, a Greek bestiary from the 2nd century that made its way into the medieval world and got read with all the interpretive nuance of a 6th grade book report. It said bees were chaste, wise, and fearless in battle. They defended their hive with their lives, which, as you might recall, they quite literally do. A stinging bee is a dying bee. That sacrifice? Well, you can imagine how monks saw that one, martyrdom. But bees weren't just admired in writing. They were revered in practice, especially in monasteries. Monks kept hives not just for the honey, which was valuable enough, but for the wax. You see, wax candles were the only kind allowed on Catholic altars. Tallow, animal fat, was too smoky, too smelly, and too, well, sinful. It symbolized decay, flesh, impurity. Beeswax, on the other hand, was pure, clean, produced without sin. It came from creatures that didn't mate and lived lives of perfect communal piety. In short, beeswax candles were tiny pillars of virtue. Lighting them was practically a sacrament. Every monastery had a wax master. Yes, that was a real title. The wax master managed the bees, the candles, and sometimes even the theological symbolism of light itself. He would decide which candles went where, how they were trimmed, and when new ones were needed. During Easter, he'd oversee the Paschal candle, a massive human-sized candle representing the risen Christ made entirely from the work of bees. Its preparation was an event, a spiritual and literal meltdown. In some abbeys, monks even sang to the bees. Soft hymns whispered during hive maintenance, because bee deaths were serious business. A dying hive wasn't just economic loss. It was a spiritual warning. A monastery that failed to care for its bees might soon fail in other areas: prayer, fasting, obedience. There are records of abbots citing bee die-offs as a reason to call for penance. The bees are gone, they'd write. God is displeased. You, of course, are now wondering how the bees felt about all this. Hard to say. Probably indifferent. Bees don't care about your theology. They care about temperature, moisture, and the weird fungus on the elderberries. They don't even know they're in a monastery. But that didn't stop monks from projecting meaning onto every buzz, every waggle dance, every drop of golden resin clinging to a waxy frame. Some monasteries even wrote bee prayers, tiny poems and invocations, asking for safe swarms, gentle queens, and a productive harvest. Here's a real one, translated from Old Irish. Little bee of the wood, sweet is your toil. May you not suffer. May your hive be full. It's adorable. It's also deeply weird, because that same monk probably spent the morning flagellating himself over impure thoughts and the afternoon translating Augustine, and now he's writing poetry for bugs. But such was the medieval mindset. Everything had meaning. Everything was connected. Bees were tiny sermons with wings. Even in architecture, the metaphor stuck. The cloister, the central garden around which monastic life revolved, was often compared to a hive. The abbot was the queen. The monks, the workers. The silence of the cloister was seen not as emptiness, but as the sacred buzz of spiritual labor. You might not hear it, but the soul, like the bee, is always busy. Back in your own village, of course, things are slightly less poetic. Your bees aren't symbols. They're income. They're food. They're the only reason your children have shoes that aren't entirely made of regret. But even you can't help noticing how orderly it all is. The way they work. The way they build. The way a hive hums with a kind of calm intensity you've never once heard at a town council meeting. And yes, you have whispered to them. Not because you think they understand, but because it feels right. At dusk, you kneel beside your best hive. The queen inside is 2 summers old and laying well. Her daughters are foraging aggressively, returning with tiny pollen saddles on their legs like nature's cargo pants. You murmur a small thanks. Not to the bees. To whatever keeps them alive. To whatever makes them want to keep building. Because in a world where nothing is guaranteed, not the harvest, not the weather, not even your own tooth count, bees are weirdly dependable. And yes, you might be a little bit in love with them. You won't admit it to anyone, of course. But you've seen monks cry when a hive dies. You've seen grown men pray over bee boxes. And you've seen wax, warm and golden, drip down the side of an altar like sunlight made solid. So you get it. They're more than bugs. They're a reminder that something small, something simple, something endlessly buzzing, can still make the world a little sweeter. Even in a century filled with plague, mud, and existential draftiness. Even when Brother Wolfstan is singing, you wake up to the sound of someone screaming. Not a scream of horror, no. This one's more like a long, slow, unconvincing moan of disappointment. Turns out your neighbor is trying to lance his own boil using a hot knife and a mirror. Again, it's not going well. There's some blood. There's a lot of swearing. The knife was probably last used to gut a fish, and the mirror used to be part of a saint's reliquary before someone dropped it during a drunken feast and quietly repurposed it. You close your eyes and try to pretend you're still dreaming. Maybe about warm bread, or cloud-shaped sheep, or bees that don't sting you in the face. But no. Today is your reminder that while bees may be industrious, sweet, and symbolic, the humans around them, especially the humans using their byproducts to cure everything from baldness to demonic possession, are not always so graceful. Because today, we enter the sticky world of medieval medicine. Or, as we might also call it, winging it with honey. Let's be clear from the start. Honey wasn't just dessert for your medieval ancestors. It was medicine. It was antiseptic. It was embalming fluid, wound dressing, energy booster, cosmetic, toothpaste, eye treatment, and, in one horrifying case, the secret ingredient in something called melafeedmun. Yes, we will get to that. But first, the basics. Honey, in the Middle Ages, was believed to be not just sweet, but healing. And to be fair, this one wasn't entirely wrong. Even modern medicine acknowledges that honey has antimicrobial properties, thanks to its high sugar content, low moisture, natural acidity, and a neat little enzyme called glucose oxidase. Basically, honey creates hydrogen peroxide, gently, slowly, which is great for killing bacteria and giving your wounds that extra zing of artisanal infection control. So naturally, medieval folks applied honey to everything. Cuts, bruises, infected toenails, awkward marital tensions, you name it, someone probably smeared honey on it. You've got a sore throat? Swallow honey and vinegar. You've got a cough? Try warm honey mixed with barley water, garlic, and regret. You've got lice? Rub your scalp with honey and ash and pray to Saint Apollonia. You've got the Black Death? Okay, well, now we're just out of our depth. But they tried. And some of the concoctions are fascinating. Take, for instance, this delightful remedy for a hot fever from a 12th century herbal. Take fennel, sage, honey, and the urine of a boy under the age of 10. Mix thoroughly. Consume before sunrise. Let's just pause there. We're not here to kink-shame a 1,000-year-old apothecary, but you have to admire the sheer optimism behind it. Urine? Really? And it had to be a boy's? Under 10? Is there a scientific reason, or did the monk just not like sharing his fennel? Let's move on. In Anglo-Saxon England, the Lacnunga, an old English medical text, was full of honey-based cures. There was a treatment for eye infections involving honey, wine, and pulverized redstones. There were honey pills for digestive issues, honey ointments for leprosy, and, best of all, honey suppositories for, rearward ailments. That's right. Sometimes they didn't just eat the honey. They applied it elsewhere. Don't picture it. Too late? That's on you. But honey wasn't the only bee product to get this kind of treatment. Let's talk wax. Yes, that soothing substance you normally associate with candles and luxury lip balm. In medieval medicine, it was more like silly putty meets first aid. Doctors, and I use that term with deep sarcasm, would melt wax and blend it with herbs, animal fats, or oils to make poultices. These were smeared on wounds, sore joints, abscesses, or anywhere the body was crying out for help in a time before antibiotics or basic hygiene. One popular use? Wax earplugs. Not for soundproofing, mind you. These were infused with herbs and shoved into the ear canal to cure headaches, or migraines, or, in some cases, to absorb excessive thoughts. Yes, apparently, thinking too much could cause a surplus of hot vapor in the skull. The solution? Wax in the ears. It's like noise canceling, but for your personality. Then we have propolis, bee glue. This resinous substance was collected by bees from tree buds and used to seal cracks in the hive. Medieval beekeepers quickly realized that propolis had antibacterial properties. So they scraped it off the hive walls and used it in everything from wound dressings to dental rinses. It tasted like pine-scented despair, but it worked. Maybe. Sometimes. Let's not ask too many questions. Now, on to bee stings. One would assume, logically, that people tried to avoid them. And usually, yes, they did. But some brave or slightly concussed individuals believed that bee stings could actually be therapeutic. You had arthritis? Bee stings. Gout? Bee stings. Paralysis? Definitely bee stings. The logic was simple. The venom caused swelling and pain, which meant something was happening. And in a time when most medicine involved either bleeding you or feeding you ground-up badger bones, a little venom actually felt promising. It was the medieval version of no pain, no gain. This eventually led to apitherapy, the idea of using bee venom to treat ailments. Today, It's still around in some corners of alternative medicine. But back then, it was a roll of the dice, especially if you were one of the many people unknowingly allergic to bees. You came in for joint pain. You left with hives. The irony is almost poetic. Now let's discuss the strangest, stickiest footnote in all of bee-related medicine, the melophaedmon. This was not a European idea. It came from ancient China and the Arab world, but it was recorded in medieval texts and passed around as a kind of horrifying fun fact. Here's how it allegedly worked. An elderly man, nearing death, would volunteer his body for medical preservation. He would stop eating food and consume only honey, gallons of it, until his body was saturated. He would bathe in it, drink it, sweat it, bleed it. After death, his corpse would be placed in a stone coffin filled with honey and left to steep for 100 years. The result? A human-honey hybrid, a melophaedmon, whose remains could be used as medicine. Just scrape off a chunk, dissolve it in warm water, and drink it to cure broken bones, internal injuries, and poor life choices. It's worth repeating that this may not have actually happened, but the fact that people believed it could tells you everything you need to know about medieval medicine. It wasn't just science. It was faith, desperation, hope, and maybe a little too much time alone in a candlelit room. So where does that leave you? The humble medieval beekeeper? You're not a doctor. You're not a monk. But you are the keeper of the cure. Your honey is traded, bartered, and hoarded. Your wax is rendered down and sold to the local midwife. Your propolis is sent to the abbey apothecary in little sticky bundles. Your bees, in a way, are healers, and you, their translator. You didn't plan for this. You just wanted something sweet for your bread. But now the villagers line up at your door with rashes, boils, bad backs, and spiritual confusion. They ask for honey. They ask for help. They ask for hope. And you give them a jar. Because sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes it's enough. And sometimes it works. So you go back to your hives. To the buzzing, the calm, the order. You watch the bees fly out, one by one, into the wide, uncertain world, gathering pollen, making sweetness, healing wounds they'll never see. Just like you. Still buzzing. Still trying. Still sweet. You wake up to silence. Not the peaceful, birdsong kind of silence. Not the kind of silence that whispers go back to sleep. You're safe, nothing is on fire. No. This is the kind of silence that makes you sit up in bed, scratchy wool blanket sliding off your flea-bitten shoulders, and listen. Because the bees aren't buzzing. At all. And that's when your stomach drops like a sack of moldy apples. Because in a medieval village, a quiet hive is never just a coincidence. It's not bee nap time. It's not they're on holiday. It's something is wrong, the sort of wrong that smells like betrayal and sounds like a lawsuit, if lawsuits existed here. But they don't. Only curses. And pitchforks. And occasionally, bee-based revenge. Yes. Today's lesson is all about the darker side of medieval beekeeping. You thought tending bees was a tranquil life of sunshine and pollen, didn't you? A peaceful, bucolic existence filled with sweet jars of golden nectar and soothing hive maintenance. Nope. It's a turf war. And like any good turf war, it starts with theft. Bee theft, to be precise. Let's not sugarcoat this. In medieval Europe, stealing bees was serious business. Think, the 14th century version of hijacking an armored Brinks truck filled with liquid gold. A healthy beehive could produce several pounds of honey and wax per season, two commodities that were, quite literally, priceless in a time when sugar was a luxury imported from places most villagers couldn't pronounce. So imagine waking up, stumbling out in your turnip-stained tunic, only to find that your best hive, the one you spent months building and tending, the one with the queen you've named Matilda the Magnificent, has vanished. Gone. Poof. Like a medieval Houdini made of bugs. And it wasn't the wind. Hives were heavy. They didn't just tiptoe away in the night. This was theft. Premeditated. Cold-blooded. Someone crept through your yard under cover of darkness, lifted the hive, carried it off without getting stung to death, and probably even bowed sarcastically on their way out. It gets worse. Because in many parts of Europe, especially England and France, bees were legally classified as livestock. Yes, livestock. Like pigs. Or cows. Or that one-eyed goat that screams at children during feast days. That meant bee theft was legally on par with horse theft. And horse theft was punishable by anything from a hefty fine to, and we're not joking here, death. That's right. Steal a bee, win a noose. Now, you might be wondering, how do you prove someone stole your hive? There's no CCTV, no fingerprinting, no BuzzFeed investigation. Just a hunch, a lot of righteous indignation, and possibly a very angry monk who swears he saw Brother Egbert loitering around your apiary. Fortunately, medieval legal systems had a solution: trial by witness and oath. Which means you could drag your neighbor in front of the manorial court and accuse him of theft. He would swear on his immortal soul that he didn't do it. You'd swear on your immortal soul that he did. And then the local reeve, usually a guy who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast, would decide who he liked better. Justice. It's a system. But if you couldn't win in court, there was always the alternative route: revenge. Oh, the revenge. Welcome to the world of bee feuds. These weren't just petty squabbles over pollen. These were long-running, mutually destructive grudges between neighbors who had way too much time and too many bees on their hands. We're talking sabotage, hive poisoning, smoking out colonies in the night, even planting bad flowers in someone's field so their bees would make bitter honey. Yes, floral terrorism. In 1423, a beekeeper in Flanders was accused of sneaking into his neighbor's apiary and lighting a fire under the hives to smoke the bees unto confusion. The case was dropped when the neighbor fell into a drainage ditch and broke his leg, presumably while chasing bees in a fit of rage. No one came out looking good. In parts of rural Germany, it was common practice to inscribe protective runes on your hives, not just to bless the bees, but to curse anyone who touched them. Some were poetic. Others were more direct, like, "He who dares steal these bees shall feel their sting in hell." Subtle. Now let's talk about a real spicy tradition: telling the bees. We touched on it earlier, back when your bees were your family. But in times of feud, telling the bees wasn't just polite, it was strategic. If your neighbor died suddenly, you had to go whisper the news to your bees. Not doing so could cause them to abandon the hive, swarm, or even die from grief, according to belief. But some people used this to their advantage. If you really wanted to curse someone, all you had to do was sneak over to their hives, whisper false news: "Your beekeeper has died, it's over," and hope the bees believed you. We call this psychological warfare, medieval edition. There are even stories of bees attacking trespassers, which led to bizarre local legends of judgment hives, colonies that would sting thieves but spare the righteous. Of course, this was just what happened when you poked a box of 20,000 insects with a stick. But superstition needs no logic. Now, if you were particularly paranoid, and who wasn't really, you might invest in hive locks. These were crude wooden mechanisms or iron clasps used to seal the hive entrance at night. Yes, medieval people literally locked up their bees. It didn't always work, but it made them feel better. And then there was hive poisoning. This was the nuclear option. If you really hated your neighbor, like "he stole my wife" and my honeycomb level of hatred, you could smear toxic herbs like hellebore or henbane near his hive entrance. The bees would gather the pollen, bring it back, and slowly die. It was a slow, silent massacre. And of course, totally illegal. But who would know? The bees can't talk. Unless you whisper sweet nothings in Latin. Then maybe. You, of course, are a law-abiding beekeeper. Mostly. You might grumble when someone sets up their hive too close to yours. You might casually mention that your neighbor's bees seem a little slow. You might, hypothetically, move your hive 6 inches onto his land under cover of darkness just to assert dominance. But you would never start a feud. Except maybe that one time. And you don't really believe in curses. Except maybe that other time, when Brother Peter's hive exploded and he blamed it on the fact that he forgot to say grace before milking the bees. He was confused. No one corrected him. Still, feuds and thefts aside, most of the time you keep your bees, and your bees keep you. You watch them work, and in their strange little dance you see a lesson: be busy, be quiet, sting only when absolutely necessary, and keep your hive locked, because you never know who's watching.